Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time, we're looking at something that's been on my mind a lot lately.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this whole concept of marking and avoiding harmful influences.
Okay.
It's something I came across reading through this text called Pasted Text. And
Interesting.
yeah, it's really got me thinking, like how sometimes we can be so sure of ourselves.
Hmm.
We think we're too smart or too strong to fall for anything.
Right, like we're somehow immune to those bad influences.
Exactly. But pasted text suggests that that kind of thinking,
Yeah.
well, it might actually be a form of pride, and that can be kind of dangerous.
You've hit on something super important there, I think. This
Okay.
isn't just some old idea,
Yeah.
It's like it directly applies to how we deal with the world today.
Oh, total.
Even if we're not coming at it from like a religious angle or anything,
Right.
we're just bombarded with information constantly.
All the time.
News, social media, just conversations.
Everywhere.
Yeah, so learning to mark and avoid, it's like building this mental filter,
Mhm.
figuring out what's good for us, what we believe in, what's going to help us, and then what's going to be harmful.
That makes sense. So I guess my question is, what does mark and avoid actually mean, like, in real life?
Right.
Because at first, I have to admit, it sounded a little judgy.
Oh, yeah, I get that.
Like I'm supposed to go around labeling everything good or bad.
It's not about that at all.
Yeah.
It's more about protecting yourself.
Yeah. Okay.
Certain things, whether it's ideas, people, even just like habits we have, can lead us down the wrong path.
Oh, I see what you mean. So it's about being intentional with what we let into our lives.
Exactly. It's not about living in a bubble or anything, though.
Yeah.
It's about being thoughtful,
Okay.
critical. Think of it like this. If you're walking through a field and you see a sign that says, danger, mines, you're not just going to ignore it and keep going, right?
No way.
You're going to stop. You're going to think about it. And then you're going to choose a safer way to go.
That's a good analogy.
Marking and avoiding is kind of like that.
Okay, so it's about being aware of the danger and making good choices. So this whole idea, it comes from the Bible.
Yeah. Pasted text mentions a few verses.
Yeah.
Romans 16.17, 1 Corinthians 15.33, and 2 Timothy 3.5.
Wow, okay.
And they're all about protecting your faith and what you believe in.
Interesting.
It's like each verse is looking at the same message from a different angle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Be careful what you let influence you.
And one thing pasted text really focuses on is how pride can get in the way of all this.
Yeah, absolutely. Pride can be so sneaky.
Right.
It's not always like bragging or anything.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just this little voice that says, you're too smart for that, or it won't happen to me.
And that's when it gets dangerous.
Exactly. Then you're not even aware of it.
So how does that actually look in real life? Like, what are some ways pride makes us vulnerable?
Well, think about a time you might have been overconfident. Maybe you ignored someone's advice because you thought you knew better.
Oh, yeah.
That's pride blinding you to the pitfalls.
Wow.
Or maybe you dismissed a warning sign because it didn't fit with what you wanted to believe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That's pride making you ignore important information.
I've definitely done that before. Like when someone gives me advice that feels like criticism, even if it's probably true.
Oh, we've all been there. And then there's this other type of pride.
Okay.
Complacency.
What's that?
It's when you get so comfortable with your routine, your beliefs, that you lose that sense of urgency.
The urgency
to be careful, to keep learning and growing,
Oh, okay.
And that's when harmful things can really sneak in.
That's kind of scary.
It is, because you don't even realize it's happening until it's too late.
And pasted text doesn't sugarcoat the consequences of pride either?
Not at all.
Ah.
There's that verse in Proverbs 16.1 that says, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall.
Whoa, that's intense.
It is. It makes you think.
Yeah, for sure. So if pride is the danger zone, how do we get to the opposite? How do we become more vigilant?
Well, that verse isn't meant to scare us. It's meant to wake us up.
Okay.
It's a call to humility, to realize that we don't have it all figured out and that we need to be proactive about protecting ourselves.
And that's where marking and avoiding comes in.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? Like, what are some concrete steps?
Well, pasted text outlines 5 practical steps.
5.
Yeah, and we'll go through those in detail later,
Yeah.
but I can give you a sneak peek.
Okay.
It all starts with staying rooted in your beliefs.
What does that mean?
It means going back to those core values that guide your life.
Okay, so really understanding what you believe in.
Yeah, so you have a strong foundation.
Sounds like something we should definitely unpack more.
We will. Stay tuned because we're just getting started.
All right, so we're back and ready to dig into those 5 practical steps from pasted text.
Okay, great. The first one is all about staying rooted in your beliefs. And I think a lot of people might underestimate this step. You know, it's easy to just coast along
Yeah.
thinking we know what we believe.
Right.
But this text really emphasizes that we need to be active about it.
So it's not enough to just have beliefs. You have to really understand them.
Exactly. Think of it like tending a garden.
Okay.
You can't just throw some seeds down and expect everything to grow perfectly.
Right.
You got to pull out the weeds. You got to make sure the soil's good. You got to nurture the plants.
I like that.
It's same with our beliefs. We need to question them, challenge them, and be open to them evolving.
That makes sense. Because if you don't even know what you stand for, how can you decide what's good or bad for you?
Exactly. And that leads perfectly to the next step, which is praying for wisdom and discernment.
Okay.
This is where we acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. We need to be humble and ask for guidance.
So whether it's through prayer or meditation or just taking some quiet time to think.
It's about tapping into something bigger than ourselves.
I think that can be hard for some people you know,
Oh, yeah.
to ask for help, especially about something as personal as your beliefs.
It can feel like you're admitting weakness.
Right.
But think about it like this. Even the best athletes in the world, they still have coaches, someone to give them a fresh perspective, to point out their blind spots.
To push them harder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in the same way, seeking guidance from a higher power, or even from mentors and people you trust, it can actually be really empowering.
It's like you're building a support system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Both in the spiritual sense and here in the real world.
So it's not just about you going it alone.
Right. And that brings us to the third step, which is seeking godly counsel.
Okay.
And this doesn't have to be strictly religious or anything.
Right.
It's about surrounding yourself with people you trust.
People who want the best for you.
Yeah, who can give you solid advice when you're facing a tough decision.
Like we were saying before about not living in a bubble. It's important to get different perspectives.
Think of it this way. Imagine you're lost in the woods.
Okay.
Would you rather try to find your way out all alone?
No way.
Or would you ask for help from someone who knows the area?
I definitely ask for help.
Right. So having people you trust to guide you, it's like having a map and compass for your life.
They can help you stay on the right path.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got staying rooted in our beliefs, praying for guidance, and seeking wise counsel.
Right.
What's next?
The next one might be the toughest,
Ah.
but it's also probably the most important. It's practicing humility.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is. It's about letting go of that ego,
Yeah.
that need to be right all the time, that resistance to admitting when we're wrong.
I can see how that would be tough.
Right.
But I guess it's kind of the foundation for everything else we've been talking about.
It really is.
Hmm.
Because if we're not humble,
Yeah.
then we're not open to learning. We're not willing to ask for help.
And we're more likely to ignore those warning signs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Humility is like the key that unlocks all the other steps.
Okay, so humility helps us approach marking and avoiding with the right attitude.
Yes. It's not about judging other people or thinking you're better than them.
Yes.
It's about realizing that we're all just trying to figure things out.
And we all make mistakes.
Exactly. And we can learn from each other.
I like that.
Okay.
So practice humility is definitely going on my list.
Good. So the final step is all about taking action.
Okay.
It's not enough to just recognize the harmful influences.
Right?
We have to actually do something to distance ourselves from them.
So that could mean setting boundaries in relationships.
Yeah.
Or changing what we watch and listen to.
Mm-hmm.
Or even leaving situations that aren't good for us.
Exactly. This is where it gets real.
It's one thing to talk about marking and avoiding, but actually doing it can be hard.
It can be scary.
You have to make tough choices sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to have difficult conversations or walk away from something familiar.
But it's also empowering, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you're taking control of your life.
You're not letting outside forces dictate your choices.
Exactly. Marking and avoiding is all about aligning your actions with your values.
And creating a life that feels authentic.
Yes. And even though it might be uncomfortable sometimes,
Yeah.
ultimately it's about living a life that is truly fulfilling.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
I'm starting to see how these 5 steps really work together to help us make good choices and protect ourselves from those negative influences.
And it's not just theory.
Right.
This stuff applies to real-life situations.
So how do we actually use this in our everyday lives?
That's a great question, and it's something we're going to dive into even deeper in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look at specific examples of how marking and avoiding shows up
in our relationships at work, even in what we consume online.
It's really interesting.
This is really making me think about all the different areas where I can be more intentional.
After the goal. And remember, we're all works in progress.
Right.
So just keep learning and growing and stay tuned for the next part.
Okay, so we've talked about what marking and avoiding means, those 5 steps to make it happen. But I'm curious, like, what's the overall point? Why is this so important?
That's such a good question. It's not just about following rules or checking things off a list.
Right.
It's really about protecting something valuable.
What's that?
Your inner world. Your beliefs, your values, that sense of peace. It's realizing that you have a choice in what you let influence you.
Like we were saying before, it's like being a gardener.
Exactly.
You decide what to plant, what to nurture, and what to get rid of.
And if we're not careful, we can end up with a garden full of weeds.
Weeds.
Yeah, negative thoughts, toxic relationships, bad habits, all choking out the good stuff.
Oh, I see what you mean. And pasted text talks about this danger of spiritual complacency.
Right.
What does that even mean, though, to be spiritually complacent?
Well, that's not always super obvious. It's more like this sneaky thing,
Uh-huh.
Imagine someone who goes to church every week, maybe even volunteers, but their heart's not really in it. They're just going through the motions.
So they've lost that passion.
Exactly. And the text warns us that this makes us vulnerable.
Vulnerable to what?
To anything, really.
Yeah.
Because we're not actively engaging with our beliefs.
So it's easier to be swayed.
By whatever comes along.
Yeah.
Whether it's some new idea, a convincing argument, or just the pressure to fit in.
It's like we've let our guard down.
Exactly. And the opposite of complacency isn't about just being busy or doing more religious stuff.
Okay.
It's about having this attitude of humility.
Humility again. I'm seeing a pattern here.
It's crucial.
But how does humility fight complacency?
Well, when you're humble, you're open to learning.
Okay.
You admit you don't know everything.
Right.
You're not afraid to ask questions or seek guidance.
So you stay engaged.
Exactly. You keep growing and learning instead of getting stuck.
So humility is like the opposite of that know-it-all attitude.
It is. And the more humble you are, the more curious you become.
And that curiosity helps us stay alert.
It fuels that discernment, makes us constantly check what we're letting into our lives,
To make sure it matches our values.
Exactly.
This whole conversation is making me realize that marking and avoiding isn't about shutting out the world.
No, not at all.
It's about being more intentional about how we engage with it.
That's it. It's being proactive instead of reactive.
And making choices that are good for us.
Instead of just letting life happen to you.
So we can create a life that really reflects who we are.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want listeners to take away from all this?
If I had to choose just one, it would be this. You have more power than you think. You have the power to choose what influences your life.
Okay.
You have the power to set boundaries. You have the power to create a life that is truly fulfilling.
That's really powerful. And I think it perfectly sums up marking and avoiding.
It's not about being afraid or judging others. It's
Yeah.
about taking charge of your life and making choices that help you become your best self. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. We're all learning and growing. So be patient with yourself. Be open to new things and trust the process.
Great advice. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some things to think about and some practical tools for your life.
Absolutely. And we want to hear from you. What resonated with you the most? What are you going to mark and avoid this week? Share your thoughts with us on social media. Let's keep the conversation going.